All right, before I get going on this, I just want to point out that even though I do a lot of stuff on social media, I actually really don't know what the hell I'm doing half the time. I do respond to quite a few comments, but I did find a way to make that a little bit more efficient. I found a way to access those without going through each and every single video. So with that, you'll see a little bit more of an increase in the amount of comments that I respond to. So definitely let me know if you have any questions or anything. There's a much higher probability that I'll get back to you. Now, a lot of the times when I don't reply, it's just I just didn't see the comment. But I think now I've got a better way of doing that, so that's definitely going to increase. So this fly is going to use a technique that I've been using for quite a while. I kind of came up with it fiddling around. As I said many times before, I don't claim to have invented anything. I'm sure somebody else might have done this, but kind of came up with it in my head. This is kind of what we're going to get as a finished product. This is called a touch dubbed emerger. I'm going to tie this in a sulphur, but you can mix and match the colors and do this for any type of mayfly that you want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this light yellow thread. I don't really have a brand or anything for it. As you can see, there's really no tag or anything on there. It's just a spool of thread I've had for years and years and years, and to be honest with you, when it's gone, it's kind of a bummer because I don't know what it is, and I'm not going to be able to replace it. But it's, if obviously that's not going to matter. Any light yellow thread for sulphur is going to be just fine. So I'm going to get that started, and there's no real need for a thread underbody or anything like that. I'm just wrapping a little extra here because I think I nipped the thread a little bit when I cut it. But the first thing I'm going to tie in is I'm going to tie in some strands of this brown sparkle emerger yarn. And you can get this pretty much anywhere. I like to take a chunk of it and rip it in half because the strands that it comes in are pretty thick. So this is a half of a strand of brown sparkle emerger yarn. And I'm just going to get that going right up here. And I want to build up a little bit of bulk, so I want to tie this in all the way down the shank. And I'm going to hold that nice and tight as I take touching wraps all the way down. Okay, and you can cut it whenever. I'd like to kind of move on from that, so I'm just going to go ahead and cut that right away. That'll kind of be my trailing shuck. And on the way back up, what we're going to do is we're just going to take touching wraps because this thread is pretty thin. So when you do one layer of it, the yellow color doesn't really come out all that much. So I want to make sure that I take a couple of wraps up and down so that you can see that yellow. Whatever mayfly you are trying to imitate with this, you definitely want to see that thread color, and you'll kind of see why when I show you the nature of the fly. So I'm just going to go take one more trip all the way down to the back. And then one more back up, and that should be good. Now I realized I forgot something before I started this video, so I'm going to do something kind of weird. I need a strand of this thread. Well, actually, no, I got a spare piece right here that might be long enough. I hope it's long enough. But anyway, here's just a stretch of the same thread that I'm using. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, I'm going to bring it around on top, cinch that in, and just tie that in all the way down the side until I reach the back of the fly. So we've got about 3 layers of thread underbody there. Doesn't have to be perfect. Okay, so here's where we're going to kind of put together the body here. So with the emerger, you got the trailing shuck here with the yarn. And what I want is I want an effect where I can see the body of the mayfly with the shuck kind of splitting apart a little bit. I kind of came up with this when I was fishing still waters, because a lot of times on still waters during a hatch, you can get a really good look at some of the shucks that are left on the surface. And you can, pick them out, look at them. And emergers are actually kind of sloppy when they're hatching. There's stuff all over the place, and I don't mind when I tie emergers to have just material and crap all over the place. They're kind of sloppy. So what I'm doing is I'm taking some of this loon wax, and as I'm putting it on there, you can tell that it's really kind of dried out. I'm gonna dig into that with something and try to get some moist wax here. I don't use a lot of wax ever. I barely ever use it, so the wax that I have is pretty old. But all right, I think that should be okay here. Okay, so I've got some wax on my thread. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some brown possum dubbing, not a lot of it, just a little tuft of it like this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just break it up as much as I can. I want this dubbing, I don't want any clumps. I want as much of this dubbing to be broken down into single strands as I possibly can. Because remember what I said, I call this a touch dub technique. So we're not really going to wrap this dubbing onto that thread. We're just going to touch it. So I'm going to take that thread with the wax on it, take this little tuft of individual strands, and I'm just going to tap it onto the thread. I'm not going to wrap it onto the thread. I'm not going to do anything to secure it. Just going to tap it. I'm going to let the wax grab the dubbing. And the wax will kind of hold it on there. See, this is a little bit too thick, this little chunk right here, so I want to break that up. The wax will just kind of grab it and just hold it onto the thread. And this fly, even though you wouldn't think it by looking at it, is actually surprisingly durable. Because when I start wrapping this, the thread is going to lock down those individual fibers. And because they're individual fibers, there's really not much for the trout's teeth to grab onto or anything like that. So I haven't had this fly come apart. I haven't had any problems. It's actually surprisingly durable. So you can kind of see, I mean, I don't know, you can barely see it. I'm looking at the camera here, so you can see the thread, and you can see the dubbing on there, but you don't see much of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start wrapping this. And once we get into where the dubbing is, you'll see that it'll start coating, and you can kind of see how it's covering, but you can still see the yellow thread coming through the bottom of it. I moved it a little bit there, but that's no biggie. So I'm just going to kind of keep going up, and some of the dubbing will lay down, some of it won't, but it doesn't matter. You want it to be light, you want it to be wispy. You don't really want it to be too much yellow, too much brown, too much anything. So I'm just going to kind of keep going. I'm going to get one good wrap on the top to get a little bit of dubbing on there. And once I lock that in, I'm pretty much set. And it's going to look different every time. Okay. So now I'm just going to kind of comb all of that back. Get some thread over the top. And that is pretty good. You can see how that's nice and wispy. Kind of stroked back. You can see the yellow coming through. Everything's kind of set up exactly the way we want. So that's how we do the body part. And as I said before, that can be repeated for any type of mayfly in any kind of color. This just happens to be a sulphur. I tie the same pattern with Hendrickson's, a number of different hatches. But to be honest with you, there's really only a few hatches that I actually fish heavily. Hendrickson's are one of them. Sulphurs. I'm by the Delaware. The sulphurs go off all summer long. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to take this little chunk of 1 millimeter yellow foam, and I'm going to tie that down up towards the thorax area. And what I've done is I've just cut a nice even strip of it. And I like to keep that thin as well. Now the next thing that I want to tie in is I want to tie in these CDC puffs in light dun. The puffs are exactly what you would think they are. They're just a puff of CDC. And if you look in the middle of them, there's a little stem there. So what I want to do, the entire puff is a little much. So down here by the stem, I'm just going to pluck a little bit off of that just to kind of thin it up a little bit. I don't want too much in there. Okay, so with the stem facing the eye of the hook, I'm going to tie this in, and I also don't need the entire puff either. I want to measure the length because I don't want to cover up the body. So let's see, I want the length to be maybe right about there. So I'll cinch that in. tie it back, and let's get rid of this front part here. I've been tying a lot of dries lately. I'm getting a little excited with the season coming up. I just bought a Flycraft raft. I'm all ready to go. So I'm on dries. I'm really getting antsy for this season coming up. All right, next order of business. I'm going to take this light yellow PMD dubbing, and we'll get that tied in on the thorax. And again, as I said many times, you can match this up with any type of fly you're trying to match. This will be the front of the fly that is coming out of the shuck. So I'll get that dubbed up. I don't even need to use my little finger wetting tool here because messing around with that wax has it all over my fingers. Part of the reason why I can't stand wax. I barely ever use it. So we're going to go and we'll get the dubbing going here in the thorax. Build that up a little bit. Bring that pretty close to the eye. Okay. So here's how I do the head. What I have is I've got a bodkin here. And notice that that bodkin has a straight point on it. There are some bodkins out there that are designed for grabbing dubbing. And they have that little, see the little hook on the end of that? You don't want that. So this is just a straight bodkin, straight point, and we're going to use that to pluck out some fibers. But in the meantime, I'm going to take that puff, I'm going to pull it tight, and I'm just going to hold it on both sides to keep it even, make sure it's right on the top, and I'm going to cinch that down. Okay? I'm going to pull in those tips a little bit to make sure that I'm getting as much as I can. Now, I'm going to make 3 thread wraps. But they're going to be loose thread wraps. Don't tighten that down too much. And the reason why you don't want to tighten it down too much is I'm going to turn this and take my bodkin and slip that up underneath the CDC. And I'm going to pull it back until it's almost about to pop back out. I want to leave a little bit there, but not too much. That's probably about good right there. So you can see right there, it's on the brink of popping out, but not quite. So we also want to leave a little bit of a couple of fibers that are, kind of straggly. So what I'm also going to do is I'm going to reach in here, and I'm going to use my point to grab a couple of individual fibers. Now you got to be careful. You don't want to pull out too many. So there's one fiber. Come on, grab that. Get in there. There's 2 fibers. And there's 3. I mean, I don't have to work this hard for the third one. We're giving stupid fish a little bit too much credit, but if you don't do 3 fibers, this fly won't work. It's got to be 3. So there's 1, 2. Come on. If I pull out 2, I'll ruin the whole fly. Now I'm putting way too much effort into this for a video. You know what? I got 5 out of the 6. That's good enough. So that's what we're rolling with. So there you go. So pull out a few, basically long story short, just pull out a few spare fibers so that they're kind of flailing around a little bit loose. And what we'll do is I want to secure the tufts here in front. So I'm just going to fold that back tight. And I'm going to get thread wraps over the top of that to really secure all that in. I don't want to cut it off because, it's floating material. I want to make sure that that stays on there. So what we're going to do for the final step here is I'm going to mash my CDC down. And the reason why you want to do that is when I pull this over the top, I don't want to push all that CDC to the front. I want it splaying towards the back. So as I pull this foam over the top, I'm going to use my fingers and just kind of stroke that CDC back to make sure that it's not going towards the eye. That's going to give me that kind of look there. And I'm going to hold it as I secure it. Get a couple of wraps in front too. Now you can obviously use, actually, yeah, I got my razor scissors here. I was going to cut that off with a razor blade, but I've got these ultra thin copter scissors that I love. Get that off nice and close. The razor blade will get it off nice and close, but you also run the possibility of cutting your foam, which we don't want to do. So I'm going to take a few whip finishes in here. Get that tied off. Get up there and get that out of there. So that is that. This is a pretty cool fly. It's a style of emerger I've been tying for a while. I do it mostly in sulphurs and Hendricksons, but this is a sulphur emerger, a touch-dubbed sulphur emerger. So that body is really, really cool. The yellow color of the sulphur will bleed through, but you also have the dubbing over the top that makes it look like that shuck with the fly coming out of that shuck. I've had great success with this fly. Absolutely love it. So it's a pretty cool design. The CDC and the foam help keep it afloat nice. Really, really cool fly. Match it up to whatever bug you want to match it up to. And it's got that sloppy look that you see out of a lot of the emergers. And it's definitely a winner for me. So any questions, anything like that, as always, put them up in the comments. Like I said in the beginning, I have a new way of checking the comments and keeping up with it, so I'll make sure that I keep up with that. I'll answer any kind of questions you might have.